So my job as a journalist is really about getting to the heart of storytelling. I love being able to speak to someone and draw out the reasons why they do what they do, and being able to tell an audience and just make sure that they understand this person and their heart and their passion. And this conversation that we're about to have with Melissa, who I feel like we're best friends already. You know what I mean? I mean, you can't not be best friends with Melissa, but this is her 5th year anniversary of being the CEO. She's, I think, one of those people that, as you all know, is bright and bubbly and warm and welcoming, and I think the perfect person to be in charge of this organization and the mission going forward. So I'm going to invite Melissa to the stage. Please, round of applause. Big round of applause for CEO Melissa Connelly, please. Oh, you even got a walkout song. That's right.
Yes, I requested Kendrick for the walk-up song, in case you were wondering.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
For just everything that you do, seriously. I think I talked a lot about what I see on my end as a journalist here in the city and throughout my career of oftentimes what happens when you don't have an organization like OneGoal in place, when you don't get a chance to really get into the community. And so the first question I have for you is, why do this? Why OneGoal? It's not an easy organization to run. I know that, but it is an important one.
So I will be vulnerable, and those that know me know that that's the only way I know how to live, because I had a response to that question, why? And I think the reality is it was different for me at 6 a.m. this morning than it was yesterday. At 6 a.m., I heard my phone buzz on my nightstand, and I turned over and I looked at it, and it was my 16-year-old son. And he said, "Mom," in all caps. "The University of Chicago's director of admissions just sent me an email!" Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And I had this moment where, I could see my son's dreams coming true right in front of me. And if you know me, you know that the opportunities that he has are not opportunities that I had. That his reality is so fundamentally different than what my reality was. So why OneGoal, why education? Because it is the only solution that I have seen that has a radiating effect. You don't just, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure the people who poured into me thought that they were impacting me, but they were impacting my family for generations to come. Right, I think about, I shared dinner tonight with Robert Emmons Jr., who is a OneGoal alumni and a national board member. You probably came to the gala a decade ago, and you gave to Perspectives and OneGoal and were supporting Robert's ambitions. But Robert now has a daughter, Noah, who will one day send him the same text of what opportunities she now has. When you give to OneGoal, and when you support the kind of work that we're doing in education, it truly multiplies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know other solutions that do that besides the kind of work that we do.
Yeah, I think I've seen that, even in my own life. I mean, you guys have put together sort of this formula, if you will, to make it work on such a mass level. So I want to share this because you're closing the divide, right? This educational gap that often exists within the system. And the mission statement is building the movement to transform post-secondary advising and support. What do you think that looks like now and going forward? How do we keep building towards that?
So yes, and for those of you that are new to the OneGoal family, we have rewritten our mission statement. So we used to talk about the degree divide, and it was very focused on sort of one child at a time. And then we recognized that if we were really about it, if we're really going to make sure our young people are going to be all right, in the words of Kendrick Lamar, that we need to really reimagine the way we support our young people, and that includes not just what happens in the classroom, but what happens at the school and what happens in the entire system.
It's a village. It's from start to finish, right? Yeah.
So the current reality is very bleak, as I know many of you know. So we talk a lot at OneGoal about this statistic that the average student receives 38 minutes of advising and support, and yet half of our young people think about what's going to happen to them after high school every single day, right? 80% of them think about it weekly, and yet we give them 38 minutes across 4 years to figure out what they're going to be when they grow up. You mentioned, Jasmine, when you were talking earlier about being on a crime scene and talking to kids about what they want to be when they grow up, and they tell you, I don't know that I'm going to grow up.
Right.
I was one of those kids. I truly would have told you that I did not think I would live beyond 19. So when I became CEO, I realized that I would not be satisfied waking up and going to work every day and going from 2,000 students to 3,000 students to 4,000 students, or scaling a program or leading a successful nonprofit. I would only be satisfied if we completely reimagine the way we support our young people in asking and answering the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And doing so with a community, a village of support. That is what they deserve, and that's what we're going to do. And so we rewrote our mission to transform advising. That means we need to ensure that every single child in a school has access to a caring adult in the building who will sit down with them one-on-one and say, I see you. I know what you're up against, and I will be in your corner for whatever pathway you choose, because I want to ultimately see you achieve your greatest post-secondary aspiration. And we've proven now that that's possible. So really what's different is it's not that our ambitions have changed. I'm looking at John Dugan. I see Daryl Williams. I promise you that when they gave their first dollar, they were not doing so because they wanted to see a successful nonprofit. They were doing so because they wanted to change the world. Yeah. So the difference is we now know what it takes. We've been doing it for 16 years. We know what it takes. It takes the work that we've been doing as a OneGoal staff, and it takes every single person in this room. It takes your political will, it takes your belief in our young people, and it takes your philanthropic will to make this happen.
You talked a lot about belief, and I shared earlier that oftentimes that world, society voice can be very loud for students, right? How do you have this amazing staff, these educators, these people who want to give back. How do you get the kids to buy in, to say, I know what the world says, I know maybe even what my circumstance says, but I'm going to choose to show up and believe differently?
I promise you that's not the hard part. It's getting the adults to buy in is the hard part. Our kids have purpose, they have dreams, they have ambitions. We have a world that tries to kill them, sadly, but they have them. And really, well, sometimes all they need is somebody who sees in them what they already see for themselves.
Yeah.
Right? They need that affirmation, they need that mirror. I'm so grateful. Thank you. I'm so grateful that I had that. Many of you know this story. It's much harder to tell it, and you'll see why in a second. But I started high school in a truancy program, and I had missed more than 50 days of 8th grade. And I promise you, I did not think I would graduate high school, let alone college, let alone be sitting in this chair. Mm-hmm. And yet I had a social worker who was assigned to me as part of my program, who opened her door to me every single day after school when I didn't want to go home. Mm-hmm. And she, sometimes would just laugh with me. Sometimes she would dry my tears, and sometimes she would help me fill out my FAFSA.
It's not easy to fill out.
No, as we all know, sadly. And so, I think about the challenges our young people are up against. A lot of people forget that the kids that are in college right now are the same kids who started high school in a pandemic. They have had everything thrown in their way, every barrier, and yet they are resilient. They are committed. They are focused. And so I believe it is my moral obligation to show up for our young people the way Mrs. Jeter showed up for me.
We'll get to Mrs. Jeter in a second because she's one heck of a woman. But, I want to ask you something because it's something that I, in my specific line of work with race and culture, I come across a lot of these types of stories, right? And I even have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I have to keep going. I have to keep myself fired up. This work is important, even if it's baby steps. So I want to ask you, how do you keep yourself inspired?
So there's this concept that I'm sure all of us are familiar with of triggers, right? Things in the world that you see that make you angry or fearful or frustrated. But not many people also know this concept of glimmers. Someone does. Glimmers are things that you see in the world that give you hope, that give you optimism, that give you joy. So what keeps me inspired? I mean, look at this room. Look at the glimmers in this room. You have a room full of people in Chicago who care deeply about our young people and their futures. How you don't stay hopeful and optimistic when you look for it is beyond me. So I look for it. I look for it here. I look for it in our young people. I was in an Atlanta classroom a few weeks ago, and I sat down next to a student who was kind of ignoring the program director. We won't talk about that. And writing, and I said, well, what are you working on? And she said, oh, I'm writing a short story. That was definitely not what we were doing in the OneGoal classroom that day. And so I said, tell me more about your story. And she said, well, I'm writing a short story about being rejected from NYU, which was my dream school, and I'm comparing my response to the 5 stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and how you move through it.
Wow.
And my plan is to, in 2 years, when I graduate from my community college with my associates, to use this short story to get into NYU for the rest of my bachelor's degree.
Wow. I love that. I love that.
So that's how I find my optimism. I find it in the spirit of others, and thank goodness, whether it's Liz Thompson or Leslie Anderson or Julie Jeter, I can demonstrate this courage and this optimism and hope because I'm not doing it alone.
Yeah.
I love you more, Liz Thompson.
Well, I would like to have a little bit of a TV moment here because Miss Julie Jeter is with us tonight. And I want to welcome her up on the stage.
Nice meeting you.
Miss Julie Jeter. I can't call you Julie ever. You're only Mrs. Jeter.
I had that conversation. I've had a couple of teachers reach out now that they've seen me back home, and they're like, just call me John. I'm like, no, you're Mr. DeRay.
Mrs. Jeter.
Okay.
She'll never be Julie to me.
I just can't do it. But it's a sign of respect, right? It really is a sign of respect because y'all's relationship, as you've talked about, Melissa, has been so transformative in her life. I mean, when she first walked into your office, I want to hear about that, but I also want to hear about what it's like for you to see her now.
To be honest, I'm not surprised at all where she is. She was one of those kids I knew as a freshman that was going to take one path or the other. She would have either used all the skills that she has for good, or she was going to use them in maybe not such a good way. And I think that she had both of those components in her, but so bright, so energized, and so wanting to change things, not only for herself, but for people in general. I mean, she's really a powerful person, and driven, really driven, a lot of ambition.
Yeah. I know we're on a little bit of a time crunch here, but I want to ask you, Mrs. Jeter, Melissa, you talked a lot about getting adults to buy in, right? There are counselors out there. There are mentors out there. There are people who could really just step into a child's life. So, Mrs. Jeter, why buy into Melissa? And how did you do that?
I think the whole time I was working in education, I always tried to look at the strengths kids came with, even if they didn't know they had those strengths. Melissa was really kind of an easy gamble because she just was going to go someplace. And it wasn't just me who recognized that. People in our building, and it was a big urban high school, but everyone knew her. And she was going to make an impact no matter where she was. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm not surprised at all that here we are. I'm surprised I'm here, but I'm not, I'm not at all surprised that she's here doing what she's doing.
The truth is, though, you treated every young person how you treated me. And I will never take that for granted. I say often, I came to OneGoal because the first time anybody talked to me about OneGoal and the work that you were doing, they talked about this like program director who was investing in our young people and who cared about them and who would open their lives to them. And I said, oh, that's Miss Jeter. That worked for me. Of course it would work for other people. When I got to Bradley University and I was a freshman on my own trying to figure it out, I had gotten a 4.0 my first semester at college, and I thought I had done it. I had broken this generational curse and created this new branch of my family tree, and I got kicked out because I owed $3,000 and was not allowed to re-register for sophomore year. And so I came home and I packed my bags and I called Miss Jeter. And she called Jeff, her husband, and said, can you give her a job? I think she needs a job. And I worked as his secretary to pay for my college books for the next semester at a local community college, right? So I say this to anybody who will listen. You are OneGoal. You are what gives me hope. You are why we are all here.
Thank you. I just want to say that there were 4 social workers in the building I worked in with over 3,000 kids. There aren't enough of those specialty, maybe we had 15 counselors, so there were 20 of us trying to do all of these various jobs. But I really believe there are a lot of educators, people who are teaching math, people who are teaching science, people who are teaching history, who have those same kind of abilities to connect with kids. I've always been a little disappointed in the educational programs for teachers because I don't think they stress that enough. About how you engage and connect and make a difference in the young people that you come across. I feel really blessed that I was able to do that, and certainly this is like over the top,
Well, I would even take it a step further, Mrs. Jeter. I would say, even if you're not in education, mentoring someone is free of cost.
Right.
It's really just having conversations with someone. That could be the kid next door. That could be someone you welcome into your company. That could be someone at your company. It doesn't even have to be a child, right? Because I have mentors now, and I'm grown, right? I still need guidance. And so that's one of the things that I always encourage, I think, everyone to do, is to be able to take at least one person under their wing. Mrs. Julie Jeter, CEO Melissa Connelly, thank y'all so much.
Thank
Give it
you.
a round of applause for that.
Thank
please.
you.